sit up. You look slouchy.
Hey everybody.
Hey.
We want to talk to you today about a pretty important problem that we're seeing in marriage, and I'm sure that you've noticed it as well. It's basically infidelity. And unfortunately, so often marriages end because of an unfaithful spouse.
We have been very, very blessed in that that has not been a struggle in our marriage, despite the fact that he travels so much. And recently we had this discussion. Chris and I were driving home because we had this friend who's dealing with issues like this in their marriage, and these are good people that we love a lot, who strive to be good, faithful Catholics, but it's just sin has taken hold in their marriage, and it has caused this rift, and it's painful to see them suffer this way. In some ways, it makes me angry, in fact, that this is even an issue, that couples have to struggle this way. But we discussed, like, why is it do we feel like that we've not had this issue? Not that we couldn't. I mean, we're not above sin. We're not above total ruin of our marriage. And we always say, even with our kids, that, we have many years ahead to ruin all of them. So, we're never above ruin. But we've been blessed to not have that heartache and that struggle in our marriage. And we think there's a few reasons why, despite our schedule, despite our lifestyle, why we haven't had those issues up to this point.
Right. I think one of the truths, though, is I think there's a realization that it could happen to anyone. And so there's this intentional kind of approach to try and be careful and to avoid what could be a problem. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. As I think about some of these friends of ours, many of them are people that I would have looked at and thought, okay, this is great. They have a great faith foundation. They obviously they love each other. They've been together for a long time. They seem to know each other's struggles. So they're good to go. But then all of a sudden you look and you find out one day that they're separated or they're divorced. And when you begin to realize the reasons why, often those reasons come down to being unfaithful or infidelity. I remember, in fact, when we were younger, we had a friend of ours that they were basically having horrible troubles, and we ended up fixing the whole basement to be like a live-in apartment for this person and her kids, because at one point he had said, I love the kids, I just don't love you anymore. In the case where our friends we were talking to the other day, they have numerous children. I mean, tons of kids. And I began to wonder, like, how is she even going to make ends meet? This is real life and real problems, and so we really want to talk about it. You don't accidentally have a divorce. Like, you don't accidentally have times of being unfaithful. There are many things that will lead up to a person being unfaithful, I think. And so there are some things that we want to ask that you consider trying to put into your life.
Right. We think that for us, we realized that it comes down to practice. What have you practiced your whole life? We have situations that we can see where these people have practiced selfish gain and instant gratification throughout their whole life, and so to expect all of a sudden you're married and all of a sudden you're going to gain all this self-control is it's a wrong way of thinking. It's just not going to happen. Whereas for us in our dating life, we practiced chastity, we practiced self-control. We didn't give in to those desires when we were dating. We waited until we were married, at least for the last 2 years of our dating, and that I think that built into us both a good practice, so that as we came into marriage and called into this life of traveling and ministry, it empowered us, or at least gave us the good muscle strength of willpower to be able to withstand some of the temptations that are brought about in life.
You don't have to wait for this kind of training to start. You can begin now. And what it takes is basically starting to implement things in your life that help you with self-control. And I suggest that you do this together as a couple. So, for example, if there's one part of your scenario that you find is a trigger for horrible thinking, then talk about that. Which brings us to the second point, which is ultimately being willing to be vulnerable about the struggles, being willing to be vulnerable about maybe some of the difficulties that are going on in that marriage. So yes, in addition to being a person of self-control and starting the practice and the habit of gaining momentum with self-control, you need to be vulnerable about the things that you're struggling with.
We don't keep secrets. There are no secrets between us. I know where he struggles. He knows where I struggle. And sometimes in moments of struggle, sometimes it can be embarrassing and painful, but we allow each other into those difficult moments. And in that comes strength. We have a saying in our family we've said for years that secret sin leads to more secret sin. If there is something being held as a secret, it has so much power and authority in your life. And then what that will do is cause a rift, and it'll be a wedge that's driven down between your relationship. And so you have to banish secrets, bring everything to the light. I remember one time hearing how a couple was counseled, or a person was counseled in confession to not tell their spouse about their difficulties. And as I thought, what? Secrets are just too empowering. Don't allow them to be in a relationship. And it's, now, of course, if you have a spouse who's struggling in the area, as the person who's not struggling in that area, you have to be loving and understanding and generous, but maybe firm. You need to be firm, but there has to be compassion. There has to be forgiveness in that. You have to be able to feel like they're not going to be shredded when they come to you with a moment of difficulty. And so, no secrets. Be open, be honest, and then be compassionate.
The interesting thing, though, is that people feel a lot of shame when they're struggling, and so there's this temptation to not talk about it because you don't want somebody to know. But we began early in our dating relationship just kind of this radical vulnerability and honesty. Now, I know that there's a lot of couples that have never done that. So for them to share those kind of broken moments and the struggles that they have, it's a terrifying thing. But here's what I encourage couples to do, is to find a way to begin to start sharing more and more. It's real probable that you've been married to someone long enough, they kind of have a decent idea of where your struggles are. So, if it's pornography, then talk about that struggle. Now, this is a real frustration because I know a lot of couples that struggle with pornography, and sometimes the woman can basically say, I can't believe that you struggle with that. I'm so mad at you. It's done. Which, I can understand that feeling of frustration, and nobody wants to be compared to somebody else, but the graces in a marriage, the graces in a sacramental marriage help you to battle these kind of difficulties. And so it's a united front that you want. So whether it's, beginning with a struggle with online pornography, or whatever, massage parlors, or whatever that is, or dialogue with somebody at the office who's very sensitive and listening to every one of your stories, you have to be willing to talk about that so that you can have a united front to battle it. So for us, this is a true story. When I was younger, I was waiting tables. We were married, and there was a girl that kept, oddly enough, this might be the only time this has ever happened in my entire life, but there was a girl that kept making these odd, sexual advances towards me, which, in some ways,
you were flattered.
I was kind of flattered that I didn't look like a complete dork, but it really actually was very uncomfortable, and I kindly and tried to repeatedly tell her to please stop. I was happily married. And I would come home, though, and I would talk about this with Linda, who was ready to go karate chop this girl.
I was pregnant at the time, too. So, I probably felt like a blimp and didn't feel so happy about myself. And so to have this just colorful beep, do these things that it was not so good. Now, I do want to say, I want to add that we are not endorsing for a person to stay with a person where there's abuse and a real struggle there.
Right.
And we're not saying that sometimes a time of separation is necessary. I think that could lead to, the next point that we would recommend for a couple struggling this way is counseling.
Yep.
that sometimes a counselor, whether it be a priest or even a professional counselor who does marriage counseling, that you need to find help. But be very careful who you allow into that circle. But you may need to find help there, and you may come to a conclusion that a time of separation is necessary. But we would say fight for your marriage. Be compassionate, be forgiving. But at the same time, there may come a time where you have to be firm, and a time of separation may have to be necessary. But we do that with some really good help and some counseling to make that decision smartly.
And for those of you, don't mean to interrupt, but those of you who have already felt the ramifications of infidelity, and you've been questioning whether or not divorce is something that would be in the picture, here's a couple things to talk about with this that's important. One is, there is a ministry called Retrovi, and I've done some talks for them, and it's kind of like the last ditch. This is an amazing ministry for couples in crisis, and I have no problem whatsoever encouraging you to find them along with a counselor. The second thing is that if there is sin that's not been confessed, it will definitely be a feeding ground for more. I've thought about this too when it comes to couples. Like, why would a couple allow themselves to get into a scenario where they would be unfaithful? And I think some of it can be, there's a lot of expectations that they feel like maybe are not being met. And if you are not communicating as a spouse one to another, then you'll find someone else to listen to you. Even in my particular family, just knowing that there were certain things that were struggles and that there was not a lot of listening and maybe openness, it just hurts a lot of people. So it's got to be something that you strive at, and you work with self-control. You have to be a person that is going to start trying to begin a new way of living. Second is, be careful about who you're going to let into this world, because you're not going to accidentally just commit adultery. It's going to be something that you slow step towards more times than not. We want to encourage you to go to the sacraments, ask for forgiveness, and to be open and vulnerable with each other, because you can't keep things like that secret. And finally, that counseling is so important. So we love you. We know that this is not an easy topic. This needs to be a multi-series video, because, and we'll be doing that more, but we recognize there are a million variables. So ultimately, the tragedy is that the person that's been unfaithful sometimes is clueless to the amount of hurt that they've inflicted on their spouse and on the children. And so for those of you that are hurting, I just want you to know that we want to bless you and pray for you and be there for you. For those of you who are struggling and who are the offending party, we want to do what we can to help you to begin to start building trust again. So God bless you. Send in your questions if you have any. If you want to tell a story, maybe even a story of healing and the miracles that God has done, even in your scenario with possible infidelity, we would love to hear those stories so that we can offer more hope to others. Feel free to send that in to Linda@catholicfam.org or Chris@catholicfam.org. God bless.